transition that way. That's a very odd transition. That connects to the sermon. Okay, before we get into the sermon, though, I do have a story. So, in the case of Tripp's baptism, we got done with Wednesday class, and I was looking at the clock, and we were headed home. I said, we could stop by Lowe's, pick up some mulch on the way home. And so it was about 9:30 at night. They close soon, so we head to Lowe's. We're going to pick up some mulch, and as I'm checking out, Holly and Keith are there. And Keith is so emotional about barbecues. I've never seen him like this before. But they had just gotten the call about Tripp. And so there's something special. There's some special for that moment when your kid chooses. And so for Jen and I to be able to be there and see Holly and Keith at that time, I get it. It's a big deal. So congratulations. And we are just very excited to have the two of you in the body of Christ, and I'm glad your dad was able to baptize you. That's a pretty big deal, too. So, okay, unrelated picture. Okay, we ready to transition? Unrelated picture. So, in about 2000, they did a study of the attention of human beings. The attention span was about 12 seconds in 2000, which is right at the cusp of the advent of the smartphone. They did a study later on and found that since then it has dropped to 8 seconds, from 12 seconds to 8 seconds, our attention span, which is a problem because a goldfish's attention span is 9. We have less of an attention span than a goldfish at this point as human beings. If you were watching those baptism videos and at some point felt like this is a little lengthy, you actually understand. What happens is that we have so much access to instant communication, short version of everything, too long didn't read, that our attention span continues to drop and drop and drop. So that little goldfish you have on your dresser now thinks about stuff longer than you do. Which is a problem, because in James chapter 1, verse 19, we're told, beloved brethren, everyone must be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. You notice the language, you must be quick to hear. It's a state of being, listening is. It is a state of being where you are prepared to take in long-form information about other people's lives. You are open to learning about them and the state in which they are. There is a true story of a wealthy oil tycoon who had made oodles of money, and so he chose to use that money to go and travel the world. And so he liked to go on adventuring expeditions. So he would go to the Himalayas, and he would go to the Amazon, and then he would love to tell everybody about all the different places that he had been and all of the exploits and adventures he had endeavored on. So he's on a flight one time, and he sits down next to a man and immediately begins to regale him with all of these fantastic stories of the places that he's been, of the things that he's seen. Fish this big, how he's seen the starry night from the top of Everest. And he tells story after story after story, and this oil tycoon, he's been doing this a while, so he knows how to get every little detail just right in his field. And he can tell he is on his game. This is my storytelling moment. And he does this the entire flight, and then he realizes as they near the end of the flight, he never actually had introduced himself to this man. And so he turned to him and he apologized. He said, I've been talking to this whole flight, and we've never actually exchanged names. And he says, oh, no problem. Nice to meet you. I'm Neil Armstrong. If you don't listen, you're going to miss it. All the places I've been when you're sitting next to Neil Armstrong. when we begin to value human beings the way that Christ does, we have to learn to be quick to hear and slow to speak. Because all of our relationships, success is built off of our ability to listen and not just communicate our thoughts and our ideas and our desires. If you think about it, Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13 says, "He who gives an answer before he hears it is a folly and a shame to him." That is a truth of the Bible. If a man gives an answer before he hears, it's a folly or a shame to him. If you begin to talk without knowing who you're talking to and their point of view on it and the information that they have, without listening, all you're doing is regurgitating the information you already have. There's no learning. There's no information being gained. A fool stays a fool when he doesn't listen. All of your growth in life will be affected by the books that you read and the people that you encounter and interact with. And notice the language I used there, the people you encounter and interact with. You run into people all the time that you may not actually be interacting with. You're just simply coexisting near space. You could work with somebody one cubicle over and never actually be interacting with them in a way that you're gaining anything from them at all. You can live next door to somebody and never, ever really get to know them or gain any information from them. Every once in a while, I have an opportunity to tell Jenna a detail about me that she's never heard before. And it's always my favorite because at this point, I'm a pretty boring book. She knows all my stories. She knows all my jokes. Doesn't stop me from telling them again. But she's pretty much aware of everything about me. But every once in a while, I can slide a story out when I'm talking to the kids, and she'll go, "I didn't know that." I love that moment. I love that moment because I caught her off guard. But even more so, I love that moment when it happens to me. When there's somebody that I have interacted with in my life at a level, but I gained some new story about them that I didn't know. You ever run into that with your parents? It's a great way to exercise your listening skills. Is to take your parents as they begin to get older and take the time to sit down and learn about their life. Turns out they had one before you. They were cool. They did things. They knew things. There are things that happened in their life before you existed. And if you can take a little bit of time to gather that information, you stop being a fool and you gain wisdom. Without consultation, plans are frustrated, but with many counselors, they succeed. Proverbs 15:22. Wisdom is found in the many people. There is never a point where you will say, I wish I had gathered less information. Because the more people you get to know and the more you get to learn their stories and the more you get to learn from their wisdom, the more you can learn things the easy way instead of the hard way. I want you to learn to listen like you mean it. Not waiting for your chance to talk. Not waiting for when can I interject in this conversation my great story. I want you to begin to listen like you mean it. And so here is 2 ways to think about listening. I want you to ask yourself the question, when you listen, are you shifting the conversation to you? Do you shift the conversation to you? This is what shifting the conversation to you looks like. Somebody tells a story, and you say something like, I had that exact same thing happen to me when... And all of a sudden, you grabbed the conversation and ran with it. Do you shift the conversation to you? Are you always looking for a way to take the things that they're talking about and twist it around so that you can now have control of the conversation? Because that's the difficult thing with listening, is you don't have control of the conversation. That's the whole idea, isn't it? You're the one in the passenger seat, and they're driving you on a journey. Or do you shift the conversation, or do you do the opposite? Do you support their dialogue? Do you say things like, tell me more about that? Could you explain that to me? I'm not sure I completely understand. Can I rephrase what you said to make sure that I have an understanding of what you mean? Explain that further. Or one of my favorites, just 2 words, go deeper. To just turn to people in your life and you are telling them, I know you're driving this conversation right now. I'd like you to keep driving it. And the reason I want you to do that is we're right now in the middle of the year as we're talking about seeing Jesus and being like Jesus and imitating Jesus. It is amazing to me that when the Son of God came down, he didn't do all the talking. Because if I were Jesus, when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it'd be only red letters. I mean, why would you have anything but red letters? God comes down, he can talk. Why not just let him do all the talking? Well, what we find is that Jesus did a lot of listening. He spent a lot of time trying to understand people. He spent a lot of time asking people questions. There's a purpose and value to that. Because what begins to happen then is that when we begin to listen to other people, one, they'll be more likely to listen to you when you have something really important to say. 2, you're going to gain information you wouldn't have gained otherwise, which will make you a better person. The many counselors make you a better human being. And you begin to gain skills of insight into the other person's point of view that will help you to have a better and healthier relationship with them. If every relationship matters, then listening in every relationship matters. In Nehemiah chapter 9. Nehemiah chapter 9 down verse 16 and verse 17. It says, but they, our fathers, acted arrogantly. They became stubborn and would not listen to commandments. They refused to listen. Nehemiah and the discussion of how they went into captivity and all of the various problems that the Israelites eventually had, he said the reason that they had it is because they became arrogant and they wouldn't listen. They were stubborn and they would not listen, because listening is a skill. If I won't listen to other people whom I can see, what are the chances I might also not listen to God, whom I can't? If I won't value the words of the person right in front of me, what are the chances I'm not going to value the words of God that I have to diligently go out and seek to find and to know? They did fMRIs of people's brain. That's a functional MRI. In other words, they're studying the brain, they're looking at the brain and its imaging while somebody's thinking about something. And so they did these functional MRIs of people that were having their beliefs challenged about something. They may believe this thing over here, and so then they presented them with information that is not true. You were raised your entire life to be told that if you swim in a half hour after eating, you're dead. It's just over. You're going to die. Your cramp, die. So it turns out not real at all. There were hours more I could have been swimming. Thanks, Dad. I mean, it's not real at all. So they would take people and they would put them in MRI machines and they would see what happened to their brains when they were confronted with information that changed their worldview. And it turns out the same parts of their brain that lit up when their beliefs were being challenged are the same parts of your brain that light up when a bear is chasing you. That's how strong it is when somebody presents you with information that's new and might rock your worldview in some way. It challenges you. It is like a bear attacking you. And now you understand why we don't like to listen. Right? Is because if I begin to listen to other people, there's a chance, it turns out it's a pretty strong chance, that they're going to say some things that make me think about the way I'm living, the way I'm doing things, that will feel like being chased by a bear. And when you're confronted with something like that, there's three basic reactions that human beings have to bear knowledge. One is to fight. So instead of listening, we become argumentative, stubborn, right? Nehemiah 9, they became stubborn and would not listen. We close our ears, we stiffen our necks, we gnash our teeth. It's the Acts 7 picture with Stephen. They plug their ears, they gnash their teeth, and they stone the man. We move into fight mode. And in your relationships, you may find that that's your primary mode of dealing with the difficulty of listening to people. Somebody presents you with information that doesn't jive with the way you think right now, and so you stop listening and you start fighting. I'm going to win this argument. And I don't care what's left of you when I win. The other is to run. Flight, right? We fight or we flee. And so that's where we close our ears, we change the topic. Sometimes you can flee from it by agreeing without actually agreeing. That's the passive-aggressive flight, by the way. Sure, that sounds great. And what you mean is, that's a really dumb idea, but I don't want to argue about it. And that's a flight. Change the topic. Find something new to talk about. Shift the conversation. Instead of seeking understanding, I just seek to get out of it. Don't make waves. I don't want to make waves. Let me tell you right now, if Jesus came down on this earth and didn't make waves, we would be the most miserable people. If we are going to live for Christ, we're going to have some waves. And then the last one is to freeze, like a deer in the headlights. Sometimes the bear gets a real easy snack. You just become non-responsive. You tune them out and ignore them. So I'm going to tell a story about this brother. I will not name him. But there is a Christian that I know that for years told his spouse, I have ear damage from the military. He'd been in the military, and he had been near explosives. He had been near firearms. And so he would tell her all the time, I'm sorry I didn't hear you. I have this damage from military service. So finally, it got so bad that she said, honey, we need to go to the doctor. We need to go to the doctor. We got to get this fixed. Goes to the doctor, has audio testing done. Perfect hearing. Turns out the only thing he couldn't hear was his wife. That was a long car ride home. We become non-responsive and tune out information we don't want to listen to. These are all the opposite of listening. If you immediately fight with the argument, instead of seeking to understand, if you run away, change the topic, or if you just shut down and become non-responsive, you're not listening at all. Listening is to take on the bear in the room and say, we're going to be buddies. We're going to figure this out. I do not understand where you're coming from right now, but I want to. And I might mention there's nothing wrong with saying that. Because sometimes your face is already saying that. Right? You're talking to your spouse and they say something and it makes absolutely no sense to you, but you don't want to say that because that sounds like trouble. Your face is already saying it. So what you say is the truth. I do not understand your point of view right now, but I want to. Let's figure this out. One of the other aspects to listening is the fact that it comes at a cost. That's why we say you pay attention. Because there is a cost to your attention. Which is also why we don't give it sometimes. Because we feel like the cost is too high. In Exodus chapter 5, verse 9, when the Israelites, Moses is trying to get them to the point that they will leave and follow God, and the plagues are coming, Pharaoh says, this is how we're going to stop this rebellion. He says, let the labor be heavier on the men and let them work at it so they will pay no attention to false words. Pharaoh understood how listening works. If I want them to stop listening to Moses, I need to give them something else to do so they will not pay attention to this guy over here. Make the cost of listening too high. And in our lives, we do this sort of thing all the time. We pick up our phones and we divide our attention. I don't want to listen to this. I'm bored. It's hard to change my focus. We find something to do to divide our time. We tell ourselves we're going to multitask, but multitask doesn't really actually work. The fact is that distractions are costly. Distractions in life come with a cost, and it's one that you need to be aware of. In the scripture reading that Jake did in Matthew chapter 22, the kingdom of heaven is compared to this wedding feast, and we look at all of these different details, and typically we put a lot of our time and attention into the fact that here's these people and they don't go, and so God goes into the highways and the byways and the hedges to find people who will come. But in verse 6, look at what it says. When the invitation for the wedding feast came, they paid no attention and went their way, one to his own farm and another to his business. They missed out on the wedding feast of the king because they had a farm and they had a business and they had things that they wanted to do. Turns out that there's a cost to listening, but there's also a cost to not listening. Yes, it takes time and energy to listen to that person. But it also will cost you if you don't listen to them. When you have little kids and they want to come and tell you about things, that is a costly thing. I get it. I'm a dad. They want to tell you about this exciting thing. It's not exciting. It's a problem for them. It's not a problem. It's not. But it is to them. It is real to them. And I will tell you, if you ignore them at this age, when they get older, and they have real joys, and they have real problems, you will pay for it then. Because they will not tell you about them. There is a cost. There is a cost to not listen. If you become non-responsive in your marriage, there is a cost. The people who are the best at evangelism, the people that I have constantly been amazed with in my life that are really, really good at it, tend to be some of the best listeners that I know. They're inquisitive. They're curious. They have curious minds that want to understand other people. And then those people give them a doorway into their heart and their life. I want you to understand that if you do not listen, you will miss out. So pay the cost of attention. Proverbs 17, verse 27 says, "He who restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding." If you stop talking for a moment, you can understand the other person's position. I know this isn't rocket science. This is stuff that we all understand. But the flip side is if we understand it so much, why don't we do it more? And the answer is because it's hard. One of the reasons that it's hard is because there is a gap between the speed at which you talk and the speed at which you think. You would be so disturbed by all the different things that I think of while I'm up here talking that have nothing to do with this sermon. And I have very little control over that, by the way. I have a squirrel brain, and it thinks about all sorts of different things. But you can do it because the way that God designed the brain is that it thinks much faster than it talks. Well, that can have a negative effect when it comes to listening. Because when you're listening, you can think about all the things you're going to say next over and over and over again so quickly that you are immediately shifting the conversation over to how can I say my part, because your brain thinks so fast, much faster than the other person can articulate their ideas. So what you've got to do is you've got to take and restrain your words. Think about all the different things that you could say and then just let it go. And go right back to listening. Acknowledge it and then let it go. And go right back to listening. And when you do that, you will begin to understand people. Even people you don't agree with. Sometimes an understanding of why somebody views things the way they do is not even a matter of agreement. When I began to actually listen to atheists, it was very helpful. It felt like a bear. And it was kind of a bear. That word is a funny word. See, that's one of those things that snuck out. But when I began to listen to actual atheists and what they actually said and they actually believed, I didn't agree with them. But I do think it helped me to understand them and understand their worldview. When we listen, your listening is not the same as agreeing. It is a matter of saying, I wish to understand, so I know how to actually press forward. And when you gain that skill, and this will be the verse we finish with, in Luke chapter 8, verse 8, it says, as he said these things, he would call out, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. There's a common phrase that you see Jesus use over and over again. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Which is another way of saying, listen up. I have something for you to say. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Restrain your words and listen with your ears. God gave you two of them and only one mouth, and so use accordingly. When people actually did that, they became Jesus' disciples. An interesting thing that they have found when two people are communicating with each other and they're actually communicating, where they're listening to each other and then having a conversation back and forth based off of actual shared information and gaining growth and understanding, is they've studied them and they found that their brain waves begin to think. It's fascinating. You can have two different people, two entirely separate autonomous human beings, but when they actually begin to communicate, not just talk over each other, their brain waves begin to sync. And then I get to thinking, what happened to those people who actually had ears to hear and listened to Jesus? Did their brain waves begin to sync with their Lord? I'll tell you, I'm very interested. I like that idea a lot. If we become good listeners, then maybe we can become good disciples. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. If you are not a Christian, I want you to listen up. You can be. The invitation is for you. If you are ready to obey Jesus and to be baptized into Him and have your sins washed away, please do that. Please let us help you to do that. Or if you're a Christian who needs the help of the family here at Eastland, Every soul needs a family that will make them feel at home. I want you to understand you're at home. And if you've been taking a course that you shouldn't, you got to tell family and get some help to get back on course. If we can help you with that, please come forward as we stand and sing the invitation song.